The night began like any other inside. Studio 6B, the hum of cameras, the murmur of an expectant audience, the smell of stage lights warming the air. The Tonight Show band was swinging, laughter echoed through the studio, and Johnny Carson, America's late-night confidant, sat behind his desk with that familiar blend of mischief and composure. It was 1978, the golden age of talk shows, the era when Carson wasn't just a host, but a nightly companion to millions. He had interviewed presidents, rock stars, and legends. But what no one expected that night was that a child, a 7-year-old, with an innocent heart, would be the one to break the man who never broke. The guest list that evening was stacked. A Hollywood actress, a comedian, a musical act, and, in the middle, a young boy from the Midwest who had recently become something of a national story. His name was Timmy. He had written a letter to The Tonight Show weeks earlier, one so sincere that it made its way through NBC's mailroom and landed on Johnny's desk. The producers thought it would be cute to invite him on the show for a short, wholesome segment. Just a little break between celebrity chatter and musical numbers. Nobody imagined that it would become one of the most emotional moments in live television history. When the cue light came on and Johnny introduced the next guest, his tone softened. "Now, folks, we've got a very special young man joining us tonight. He wrote me one of the nicest letters I've ever received." And I thought, well, we can all use a little bit of kindness in our lives. Please welcome Timmy. The audience clapped as a small boy, with bright eyes and neatly combed hair, walked out from behind the curtain. He wore a slightly oversized blazer, a bow tie, and carried himself with that nervous bravery only children have. Johnny stood, greeted him warmly, and guided him to the couch. The boy smiled shyly, his feet barely reaching the edge of the seat. Johnny began with small talk. "So, Timmy, you from where?" And the boy replied, "Nebraska, Mr. Carson." The crowd chuckled as Johnny grinned. "Ah, my home state. Good people out there, corn, cows, and comedy. That's all you need." The audience laughed again, but behind Johnny's smile was genuine warmth. The two talked easily at first. Timmy told stories about his dog, about his school, and about how his family watched Johnny every night before bed, though he always fell asleep halfway through the show. Carson played along, charming the boy, letting him shine. It was sweet, innocent television at its best. Then came the moment no one planned for. Johnny asked, "So, Timmy, what made you decide to write to me?" The boy hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Because my dad used to watch you every night too, but he can't anymore." Johnny, caught off guard, leaned in gently. "Oh? Did your dad have to work nights?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. He passed away last year." The room went still. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The audience, unsure whether to react, fell silent. Carson blinked, his professional instinct warring with the sudden lump in his throat. I'm sorry to hear that, Timmy," he said softly. That's very brave of you to share." The boy nodded, clutching his small hands together. "Before he died," Timmy continued, "he told me to keep watching you. He said, you always made him laugh. So now I watch you every night, even when I miss him." There are moments on live television when time seems to stop. This was one of them. Johnny Carson, the man whose wit could cut through any silence, suddenly had no words. His face softened. The sparkle in his eyes faded into something deeper, something raw. The band stopped. The audience didn't move. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades of hosting, Johnny's voice broke. "That's," he began, then stopped. He reached for his mug, his hand trembling slightly. That's one of the nicest things anyone's ever told me, Timmy. The little boy smiled, unaware of the tidal wave he'd just unleashed in the hearts of millions. I just wanted to say thank you, he said, for making my dad laugh when he was sick. You made him happy. Johnny's lips pressed together. His eyes glistened under the lights. He looked down, then up again, this time directly at the boy. You know, he said quietly, that's why we do this show. People think it's about jokes and guests and cameras, but it's really about moments like this. His voice cracked on the last word. The audience erupted not in laughter, but in applause that rolled through the studio like a wave of emotion. Backstage, NBC producers were frozen. No one dared to interrupt. Even Ed McMahon, Johnny's longtime sidekick, said nothing. Johnny reached across the desk, took Timmy's hand, and said, "Your dad sounds like a wonderful man, and I think he'd be very proud of you." The boy looked up, eyes wide, and said, "He told me you were his favorite friend on TV." Carson smiled through tears, unable to respond. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Millions watching at home felt it too. People later said they could feel their hearts stop for those few seconds. Watching a man known for control let the world see him as human. The segment ended with Carson doing something he rarely did. He left his desk and walked around to the couch. He knelt beside Timmy, hugged him gently, and whispered something the microphones didn't catch. The boy smiled and whispered back. Then, with the poise of someone far older, Timmy turned to the camera, waved, and said, "Good night, Daddy." The audience erupted again, this time, half in applause, half in tears. The camera panned to Johnny, who was visibly crying. His head was down, his shoulders trembling, as he tried to compose himself. When he finally looked up, he simply said, "Ladies and gentlemen, that's the kind of guest you never forget." The broadcast faded to commercial, but the moment didn't end there. When they returned from break, Carson still couldn't quite regain his usual rhythm. The rest of the show carried on: the actress, the comedian, the jokes, but something was different. Johnny seemed gentler, quieter, more reflective. He closed that night's episode by saying, "Sometimes the smallest voices remind us why we do what we do. Thank you, Timmy." Then he smiled, his eyes glistening once more, and said softly, "Good night, Dad," almost under his breath. Only those closest to him caught it. The next morning, newspapers across America picked up the story. Headlines read, "Johnny Carson breaks down on live television, 7-year-old brings America's late-night host to tears," and "A moment of pure humanity on NBC." Letters flooded in, not just to the network, but to Johnny personally. People wrote about their own families, their losses, and how that small exchange reminded them of love that never truly disappears. It wasn't about tragedy, it was about connection. NBC tried to keep the segment replayed sparingly, fearing it was too emotional for syndication. But the legend grew. Years later, when Johnny retired, fans cited that night as one of the purest moments of his entire career, a rare glimpse of the man behind the laughter. Even Ed McMahon later said, "I worked beside Johnny for 30 years, but that was the night I met his heart." As for Timmy, his life took him far from Hollywood. He grew up, went to college, became a teacher. In interviews decades later, he said he never forgot that night. "Mr. Carson told me backstage, 'Your dad's watching. You did good, kid.' That stayed with me. It made me believe that kindness is louder than fame. And that, perhaps, is why this story endures, because it reminds us that behind every entertainer, behind every show, there's a human being who feels deeply, even if he hides it behind a smile." Johnny Carson spent his career making others laugh, but in that one unguarded moment, A 7-year-old made him and an entire nation cry. And sometimes, tears say more than jokes ever could.